Hey guys, tonight we're going to slow things way down as we step gently into the long, tea-scented morning of a Tang Dynasty merchant living in Chang'an, the bustling heart of medieval China. You'll wake early, before the camel caravans creak to life, before the stew pots boil, when the air still smells like river mist, old bamboo, and someone's forgotten incense stick smoldering on the altar across the courtyard. You're a tea merchant, which sounds relaxing until you remember how many things today could potentially go wrong. And in ninth century Chang'an, there are a lot: crumbling roads, nosy inspectors, and that one customer who always insists your green tea smells like moss. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I love seeing where you're listening from, so feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir in your sleep just before sunrise, groggy and tangled in your hemp-stuffed quilt. The night air has clung to the stone floor, and your bare feet regret leaving the bed the moment they touch it. There's a faint rustle outside, some neighbor sweeping his courtyard with a bamboo broom, probably while judging your lazy start to the day. You yawn and stretch. Your tiny room, wedged above your storefront in the merchant district, smells faintly of old tea leaves, ink, and rice wine from the shop next door. On the little altar shelf by the window, last night's incense cone has burned down into a perfect curl of ash. You promised to light a fresh one this morning, Jasmine, for luck. As you fumble for your tunic, you hear a familiar sound: your neighbor's rooster, who is technically someone else's rooster, crowing like he's auditioning for the Emperor's court band. You mutter a sleepy curse and shuffle to the basin, splashing your face with cold water that makes you flinch, then laugh. You're awake now, sort of outside your room. The sky is just beginning to shift, a soft, gray, pink, like the inside of a plum down below. You hear the rattle of carts and the whinny of a donkey. Chang'an is always busy, but at dawn it's gentler, like a dancer stretching backstage. You go through your routine, brushing your teeth with a twig, slipping into soft cotton pants, tugging your hair into a bun. With more hope than skill, you could leave it messy. It's market day, not palace inspection, but still, your reflection in the polished bronze mirror judges you silently. So you fix the flyaways. Breakfast is a simple affair: leftover millet porridge, barely warmed, and half a pickled plum. Not glamorous, but you save the good stuff: sweet bean cakes, candied ginger for customers who spend too long browsing without buying. As you eat, you think ahead. Orders to pack, shelves to tidy. The northern quarter might be out of roasted oolong. Should you open early, or savor the last moment of quiet before tea-based chaos begins? Just then, a thud from the stairwell. You poke your head out. It's Old Man Wen, the bookbinder downstairs, delivering his usual morning complaint. "Your barrels are leaking again," he says, scowling, but not truly mad. "I don't pay rent to bathe in jasmine runoff." You apologize, make a mental note to check the seals, and offer him a dried apricot. He accepts it like it's a peace offering from a sworn enemy. That's as close as he gets to being friendly. You finally descend the narrow stairs, your shop greeting you with that comforting scent: tea leaves, wood, parchment, and just a hint of something floral. You take a deep breath. This is your world, small, cluttered, but yours. You sweep, you arrange, you sigh at the cracked jar in the corner that you've promised to replace for 3 months. You hum a tune you don't remember learning, and slowly, the city wakes with you. A cart rattles past with a squeaky wheel. Somewhere nearby, a child laughs, You spot the familiar blue sleeve of your delivery boy, darting through the alley with a note in his hand and a bun in his mouth. And as you light your shop's incense jasmine, like you promised, you smile. Because no matter what happens today, you'll begin it with leaves, boiling water, and just enough chaos to keep things interesting. Welcome to your life as a Tang Dynasty tea merchant. It's not glamorous, it's not clean, and you probably won't survive this economy, but it smells amazing. Your shop's door creaks open on its own, or at least that's what it looks like, until you catch the flick of a sleeve and the unmistakable grunt of your neighbor, Madame Shu. She's been up since well before dawn. She's always up before dawn, and she smells faintly of garlic chives, duck broth, and disapproval. She doesn't say good morning. She never says good morning. She simply peers into your shop like she's inspecting a chicken coop and mutters, "Still selling that moss tea." You smile politely. "It's not moss. It's roasted bamboo oolong." She raises an eyebrow. You should try hawthorn leaf. The monks in the East Quarter say it makes your spleen feel righteous. This is her way of saying hello. You invite her to sit on the stool near the counter. She accepts with a dramatic sigh, as if her legs have carried her all the way from the western regions instead of 2 doors down. Her voice lowers conspiratorially. "Did you hear about the salt merchant's son? You haven't, but you know, you will." And thus begins your daily ritual of tea gossip, an essential business strategy, cleverly disguised as social courtesy. While you polish your display jars and check your stocks, she details the salt merchant's son's alleged affair with a courtesan who may or may not be hiding a second husband in the grain warehouse. You nod, offer sounds of disbelief at the right moments, and refill her cup with your mid-grade Thai guanyin, which she always insists is too bitter, but always finishes. Outside, the street begins to fill. Vendors raise their shutters with a clatter. Beggars shout greetings to one another across rooftops, and the faint sound of a flute drifts from a nearby tea house, where someone is already drunk enough to believe their playing sounds like music. You step outside for a moment, just to stretch. The sky has brightened, golden light slanting between the tiled roofs, catching on silk banners, fluttering above stalls. You can already smell sesame oil from the fried dumpling vendor and hear the rhythmic clang of a potter's wheel being prepared down the lane. And then the real chaos begins. The first official customer of the day is not a customer at all, but a city inspector in worn robes and a scroll too long for its purpose. He frowns at your tea weights, like they've personally offended him. "You're still using the bronze scale?" he asks, poking it with his stylus. "It's accurate." You reply, "It's traditional." He corrects, like that's a crime. He scribbles something on the scroll. Probably merchant refuses to modernize, likely to cause social instability, and moves on. Madame Shu leans close and hisses. He's the one whose daughter eloped with the drummer. That's why he always smells like vinegar. You nod. It makes perfect sense. Back inside, you return to your shelves. Bricks of tea are stacked neatly by region. Sichuan greens, Yunnan pu'er, your prize stash from Fujian that you label as special reserve, but sometimes sell to tourists as imperial grade. No one's ever questioned it. The name is just vague enough to sound both expensive and untraceable. You check each jar, tightening lids, brushing away stray leaf dust, and fending off the occasional ant always drawn to your lotus flower cakes, which you stubbornly keep on display despite their apparent magnetic pull for insects. One particularly daring ant climbs straight into your jasmine pearls before you flick it out and sigh. You consider putting the pearls in a tighter jar. You won't, but you consider it. Then there's the back shelf, your secret shelf. There, Behind the smoked bamboo barrel sits a small bundle wrapped in faded silk, your angsty dark roast oolong, aged just enough to be mysterious, not so much as to crumble. You've been saving it. For what? You're not sure. A high-paying customer, a bribe, a tea contest, judged by someone who actually knows what they're doing. Today, it calls to you. Maybe it's the light, or the smell of breakfast dumplings, or the fact that Madame Shu has finally gone home to nap, but you unwrap the silk and let the scent drift out deep, nutty, warm like toasted chestnuts and old paper. You smile. Not yet, but soon. The rest of the morning trickles by, like honey on a cold day. A scholar wanders in to debate boiling temperatures. A schoolboy tries to buy tea with marbles. A courier begs for anything with caffeine and forgets to pay you. And through it all, the gossip continues. From the duck vendor, you learn that the mayor has ordered a new teapot, shaped like a crane. From the candlemaker's wife, you hear that her cousin once shared tea with a Korean envoy, and now insists all Chinese leaves are too polite. Historians still argue whether the Tang Dynasty's middle class truly valued tea as much as the elites, or if merchants like you simply made it fashionable by making it available. But you don't need a scroll to know that everyone drinks tea here. The rich sip it from porcelain, the poor chew it with salt, and somewhere in between, you sell it by the handful, hoping your scale doesn't tip and your leaves don't mold. By midday, your tongue is dry, your sleeves are stained with leaf dust, and you still haven't decided whether to risk putting the Anxi roast on display. Maybe after lunch. The back room smells like 1,000 yesterday morning's old tea leaves, wet burlap, a hint of ginger root. Someone forgot in the corner. You duck beneath a hanging cord of dried orange peel and step into your inventory room, which is a generous term for a space only slightly larger than a mule stall and only slightly less chaotic. Here's where your real day begins. The delicate dance between what you think you have and what's actually in the barrels. You strike a match and light the wall lantern. Its glow reveals a small army of tightly packed baskets, half-labeled crates, and a lazy spider weaving confidence into a tea sieve. You kneel by the biggest barrel first. Puer, pressed and wrapped in paper that crinkles like old bones. You count the bricks, 9.5. The half one is chewed on the edge. You squint, teeth marks, and not human. The ant problem again. You poke the lid of the next jar, green tea pearls from Jiangnan, and it puffs slightly, as if exhaling disappointment. You tighten the lid with a grunt. The shop boy is supposed to do this, but he keeps forgetting, or pretending to forget. You make a note to bribe him with candied hawthorn later. A wooden crate in the corner lists itself as spring white buds. Feiner region. You open it carefully. Inside, definitely not white buds. It's mostly half-roasted leaves and a surprise tangerine rind. You sigh, then laugh. This happens more often than you'd like to admit. This is the joy of being a small-time Tang Dynasty tea merchant. You know every item in your store by feel and smell. There are no spreadsheets, no stock reports, just the memory of your hands. The sound a good tea makes when it settles into a scoop. The weight of a brick you've held so often, it's practically family. And then there's the top shelf. You rise carefully, knees popping, and reach for the dusty plank where the experimental stuff lives. Here lies a lopsided stack of tea that shouldn't exist. According to your more traditional customers, a cake of tea mixed with pine ash. A tin of smoked leaves so intense they once made Madame Shu sneeze herself off a stool. A bundle of osmanthus-scented tea your cousin sent from the south. which smells like springtime and wet socks, depending on the humidity. You keep them anyway, because maybe, just maybe, someone weird and wealthy will come in asking for something that tastes like regret and apricot. You brush your palms on your robe and pause. Time to check your weights. A good merchant's scale is his pride and his source of deepest anxiety. You retrieve yours from the back table and inspect it. Two shallow bronze pans, perfectly balanced, until they aren't. The left side dips ever so slightly. You wiggle the base. The wooden wedge underneath has shifted again. Stable as Tang politics, you mutter, then out loud, because you're alone and bored. Which is to say, not very. You straighten the wedge and test the scale with a familiar pouch of Tia Guanyin. The leaves pour into the pan with a soft shushing sound, like pages turning. The scale holds for now. Historians still argue whether Tang merchants used more accurate weights than previous dynasties, or whether they were simply better at pretending. You suspect the answer depends on who was watching. You just want customers to stop accusing you of favoritism every time their handful of oolong feels a little light. Your inventory check ends with the ceremonial shuffle around until you feel better ritual, in which you move several baskets slightly left or slightly right. Brush non-existent dust from the tops and convince yourself you've accomplished something meaningful. You haven't, but it's tradition. Just as you're finishing, you hear the creak of the front door and a loud sneeze. Your boy is back. He appears in the doorway, hair windswept, carrying a paper-wrapped package and wearing a look of exhausted triumph. Ma. Tea, huh? Leaves. From Loyang, he says dramatically, as though announcing a royal decree. You take the package. It's warm from travel. Inside, thin, dark strands of roasted leaf. The scent rises immediately earthy, sweet, and ever so slightly peppery. Not bad. Not bad at all. Did you get the receipt? You ask. He holds up a folded slip of parchment, then immediately sneezes again. Sorry, he adds, wiping his nose on his sleeve. There was a camel. It kicked a chicken. Long story. You hand him a scoop of hawthorn slices and dismiss him with a wave. He grins and vanishes. With the package added to your better-stocked blends, you return to the front of the shop. The light has shifted. It's mid-morning now. Warmth seeps through the windows, catching the gold flecks in your glass jars and making the shadows feel friendly. There's a kind of peace to the rhythm of your work. You're not rich, but you're seasoned. You know what sells, what doesn't, what the neighborhood aristocrats will pretend not to like, and then buy 3 bundles of. You wipe your hands on your apron and lean on the counter, surveying your empire. 26 kinds of tea, 200 wooden scoops, 1 faulty scale, and a back room ruled by ants. You wouldn't trade it for anything. Okay, maybe for a new roof. You stare at the bundle for a long moment. The Anxi roast. Its wrapping is simple old silk from a wedding robe, faded pink, now the color of overripe guava. You keep it tucked behind your smoked bamboo barrel, guarded more by superstition than security. You once caught the delivery boy snooping and threatened to make him sniff goji vinegar for a week. He hasn't tried again. You unwrap it gently. Inside, a tight cluster of leaves, nearly black, their edges curled like old paper scrolls. The scent, toasted chestnut, a hint of dried plum, and something you can only describe as autumn. If seasons had flavor, this would be late October, on a stone path with your hands inside your sleeves. You haven't sold a single gram of it, not because it isn't good, because it's too good. This batch came from a widow in the mountains, traded for a box of pickled bamboo shoots and 1 wool shawl. She'd told you it had been roasted over apricot wood. You hadn't believed her until you tasted it. And then, you didn't care. But now, as sunlight trickles into your shop like thin honey, you wonder, is today the day? You almost convince yourself to set it out front, to display it under the new arrivals sign. But then you hear footsteps, not your usual soft-footed clients. These steps are heavy, purposeful, possibly wealthy. You rewrap the bundle quickly and tuck it away, just as the curtain parts and a new customer enters. He's tall, not local, wears a dark tunic with southern embroidery, and carries a fan despite the mild weather. You peg him instantly as a tea collector rich enough to care, opinionated enough to make you earn every coin. Do you have anything aged? He asks. His voice smooth as fresh tofu. You nod slowly, gesturing to your older pu'er, pressed in the 8th year of Xuanzong's reign, aged in bamboo, notes of wet soil and diplomacy. He raises an eyebrow, and anything darker. You hesitate. Think about the Yangtze. Think about rent. Think about your leaking roof, and that one barrel full of spiders pretending to be twine. You smile. I may have something, you say. You retrieve a small ceramic jar, not the full stash. Just enough to brew a test. He sniffs it, tilts his head, then says something no merchant ever wants to hear. Interesting. You prepare the tea yourself. Hands steady. You heat the water just below boil, because leaves this special deserve better than a full rolling attack. Into the tiny clay pot they go. A brief swirl, a short, steep, you pour. The man sips, closes his eyes. You wait. He opens one eye. Apricot. You nod. And ash. He nods back, approving, and something nostalgic, like old books. Now that is your favorite tasting note. He asks the price. You quote something outrageous, and to your surprise, he doesn't flinch. He pulls out a silk pouch and drops a stack of coin so neatly arranged, you're not sure if he's a customer or a magician. He leaves with a half bundle, promising to tell someone at court about you. You pretend that doesn't thrill you to your tea-stained toes. After he's gone, you exhale deeply. Congratulations, the Yangtze roast has officially debuted. To celebrate, you brew the last drops left in the pot and sip slowly. The flavor lingers on your tongue, warm and proud. There's a moment, just one, where you feel like an emperor of your own tiny kingdom. Then you remember the other half of that Yangtze bundle is still unwrapped in the back room, currently sitting next to your bag of experimental pine ash blend. You pause. Please, let the ant not have found it. You rush to the back room, pull aside the curtain, hold your breath. It's fine. The silk is untouched. The ant, apparently, prefers candied lotus. You make a mental note to increase the price on the jasmine pearls. It's not just humans with good taste back in the shop. You tidy the tea counter and update your chalkboard with new prices. You write Yangtze Dark Roast, limited in your best calligraphy. Then frown. You erase limited and write mystic. It sounds more expensive. By late morning, a few regulars drift in. Madame Fang buys her usual barley blend and asks if it can help her think less about her brother's ridiculous poetry. You assure her it's been known to calm minds and reduce exposure to bad rhyming. A student asks if tea can help him pass his exams. You give him something caffeinated and don't mention it probably won't help with calligraphy. A young woman stares longingly at your rosebud pour, then buys a handful of cheap green and sighs. Someday, she says. You nod. You remember those days. You still have them. By noon, the shop smells of roasted leaf and warm clay. The sunlight dances through your paper window screens, making patterns on the floor. You sit behind the counter, sipping a second steep of the Yangtze roast, still good, and feeling, briefly, like you know what you're doing. Historians still argue whether Tang Dynasty tea merchants were true artisans or just clever traders. You think it's both. You trade, you brew, you gamble on flavors and dream of recognition. And once in a while, you open a silk wrapped bundle, brew a pot that makes someone stop talking. And remember why you started selling leaves in the first place. Because when it's right, tea doesn't just warm you, it stops time. Outside your shop, the clatter of hooves and the creaking of wheels announce the arrival of the caravan from the south. They're early. That's either a good sign or a harbinger of spilled tea and broken casks. You step outside, shielding your eyes from the midday sun. And there they are, 5 mules, 1 donkey, 2 exhausted porters, and an argument in progress. I said, tie the sack on the left. One of the men is shouting, waving a straw hat in frustration. You tied it on the donkey. The donkey, the accused, a wiry young man with sunburned cheeks and more energy than sense, huffs. The donkey looked left. It made sense. You sigh, stepping off the stoop. These are your people, reliable in delivery, questionable in logic. The head porter, Lee, spots you and groans theatrically. Ah, the merchant himself. Save us from this boy before I throw him in the river. You help untangle the rope from around the donkey's saddlebag, which now contains, bafflingly, both tea bricks and what appears to be a goose feather fan. You raise an eyebrow. Gift, Lee says, from the spice vendor in Hangzhou. She says you need more flair. You're not entirely insulted. The porters unload the cargo with varying degrees of grace. 2 crates of compressed tea, 3 sacks of dried tangerine peel, and 1 ceramic jug labeled "Do Not Jostle." It sloshes ominously. You make a mental note to open that one very slowly. Inside, you direct them to the storage corner, offering bowls of rice and radish pickles as thanks. Caravan work is hungry work, and your back room now smells faintly of gratitude and mild fermentation. As they eat, the conversation flows like tea from a cracked spout, slightly unpredictable, but always warm. We passed a noble's wedding procession on the road. Lee says between mouthfuls, 10 horses, 15 musicians, 1 man crying into a handkerchief, guessing he wasn't the groom. Or maybe he was, adds the boy helpfully. Maybe he saw the bride's poetry. Everyone chuckles, including you. It's a welcome pause in the day, a chance to rest, to listen, to remind yourself that the world outside your shop is still unpredictable and ridiculous. When the meal ends, they rise, brushing off crumbs, and bow their thanks. You slip them a few extra copper coins. Caravan work pays in bruises more than coin, and they clatter off down the road, trailing laughter and mule droppings. Back inside, you examine the new arrivals. The compressed bricks are firm and uniform, pressed under iron molds with care. You break one open and breathe deep. Camphor, earth, something faintly floral. Excellent. The tangerine peel is less impressive dry, but a little too dry. You'll rehydrate it gently. Maybe pair it with the mellow green you've been aging in the clay pot behind the scale. Sometimes, the best blends are just mismatched ingredients and a prayer. Then there's the jug. You approach it like it's a trap. It wobbles slightly as you lift the lid and sniff ginger and alcohol, strong alcohol. You take the smallest possible sip and immediately regret every decision you've made today. It's like being slapped by a pickled radish in a thunderstorm, but it wakes you up. So there's that. Historians still debate how frequently Tang merchants engaged in multi-product exchange, especially with items outside their registered trade. You know the truth. When someone hands you a jug, you nod, smile, and pray it doesn't explode. You carefully reseal it and push it behind the shelf with the pine ash blend. Let them fight it out back there. With the back room restocked and your nerves slightly singed by the ginger wine, you return to the front just in time for the lunch crowd. They don't buy much, they never do, but they like to linger. First comes the potter's apprentice, who claims to just be looking, but always ends up sniffing every jar and knocking over at least one scoop. Today's casualty is the chrysanthemum blend. You sigh. Again. Then the scholar, your favorite. He brings his own cup. He never talks, just nods once, offers a coin, and drinks quietly while staring at your cat, who doesn't blink. It's an unspoken duel of wills. So far, the cat is winning. Finally, the beancake seller, who claims tea gives her visions. You're pretty sure she just forgets to eat enough lunch. Today, she tells you the oolong smells like a cloud that's had a bad dream. You nod solemnly. It's the roast? You reply. She's delighted. The lunch crowd drifts out eventually, leaving behind crumbs, questions, and the faint scent of sesame oil. You lean on the counter and sip your own blend today, a simple dragon well, and watch the dust motes swirl through the shaft of light falling across the jars. There's a quiet now, a pause between breaths. The city hums outside, but for a moment, you're perfectly still. And then, just when you think you'll get a moment to nap, someone knocks over your price sign. You peer out. The donkey is back, and it has your hat in its mouth. You retrieve your hat with the sort of resigned grace only a Tang Dynasty tea merchant can possess. The donkey, entirely unbothered, swishes its tail and snorts, as if to say, "You're welcome." You make a mental note to never leave your belongings unattended around animals with questionable morals. Back inside, you inspect the damage. The hat's only slightly dented and still wearable, although you're fairly certain you can't charge more than 2 copper coins wearing something that now smells like warm hay and roasted oats. Fashion, after all, is half cent. You set it aside and turn to a far more pressing dilemma: footwear. You eye your 2 pairs of shoes. One is the comfortable hempen leather pair, well worn, slightly torn, but shaped perfectly to your foot. The other is your presentation pair, more decorative than functional, with a slightly upturned toe and stitching that screams, "Look at me." I know a tax collector. You hold one of each in either hand, as if weighing legal arguments. The practical shoes are safe, but the decorative ones are more likely to impress Madame Fang's cousin, who's rumored to be opening a new tea house in the southern quarter. You need new clients, and besides, it's not raining. Yet, you sigh and slip into the fancy pair. Your toes immediately regret the decision. They feel pinched, as though your shoes are subtly judging your life choices. But you look sharp. Sort of. You glance in the mirror again. Hair, reasonably neat. Robe, no obvious stains. Sash, tied correctly. On the second try. Tea cellar street chic. Out on the street, the sun is rising toward its most judgmental angle, casting long shadows, and a heat that hasn't yet turned brutal. Your sandals click softly against the flagstones as you make your way toward the artisan's lane. It's not far, just a short walk long enough to regret your footwear, not long enough to justify turning back. As you walk, you pass the usual characters. There's the ink vendor, who swears his black lacquer can survive 3 dynasties. The sesame oil seller, whose voice somehow projects to the next province. And, of course, the scholar with 7 eyebrows. You know that's not possible, but he does have an extraordinary amount of brow. You give each of them a polite nod, accepting a few well-meaning jabs. Try not to poison anyone today. And one unsolicited suggestion about blending tea with beetroot. You smile. You do not take notes. Then you reach the small courtyard where 2 of your potential buyers have set up a folding table and a questionable banner that reads, "Celebrating the spirit of steep." You squint at the font. It's whimsical. The two women at the table are dressed finely, their hair pinned with jade combs, their robes dyed in hues of river blue and pine green, elegant, effortless, and absolutely not interested in your practical shoes. Had you worn them, you bow slightly and present your sampler tray, 6 ceramic cups, each with a different brew, 2 floral, 2 roasted, 1 smoked, and the wild card, your fermented citrus pu'er, a gamble, Madame Fang's cousin, the one in the green robe. Sip slowly, 2 floral, she says of the osmanthus, 2 woody, of the smoked blend. Then she gets to the citrus pu'er and pauses. Curious, she murmurs, in tea merchant language, that's a green light. She leans closer. What's the aging method? Fermented in earthen jars, sealed with clay and bamboo leaves. You reply, traditional, she says, tapping her finger, but not boring. Interesting. You nearly break into a smile. Then she adds, my brother says interesting things too. He lives in a shed and talks to goats. You're unsure how to respond. So, like a true professional, you pivot. I also offer pairing recommendations. You say, that one goes well with pickled plum or silent poetry readings. She nods, satisfied. Silent poetry sounds sophisticated. Her assistant scribbles a note, and a small stack of coins appears on the table. Not a fortune, but more than a polite brush-off. She's interested. You bow again, accept the payment, and tuck it into your sash as discreetly as you can. There's a spring in your step. As you leave the courtyard, even if your shoes disagree, you pass the silk weaver's corner, where bright bolts flutter like flags, and pause at a cobbler's stall. The man glances at your feet and chuckles. Back again. You nod, slip off one shoe, and show him the inner tear. He squints. Death by fancy stitching. I warned you. I was wooing a tea house. You reply, did it work? You tap your coin pouch. Mostly. Historians still argue whether merchants in the Tang capital had true social mobility, or if they merely brushed against the elite like dust on silk. You're not sure. But sometimes, wearing the right shoes and brewing the right leaves gets you invited to whisper in the corridors of influence, or at least to sell to someone who owns a whispering corridor. Back at your shop, you kick off the fancy shoes with relief, slipping into your soft pair like a bird into a warm nest. Your toes sigh. You're not a noble. You're not a monk. You're not even a big-name merchant. But today, you made someone curious, and in your world, curiosity is worth gold leaf. You don your newly relaced comfortable shoes with a whisper of delight in your arches. Then tuck your sampler tray under one arm, balance 3 gift pouches in the other, and step back into the flow of Chang'an life. The street outside is a river, now no longer a trickle of early risers and sweeping brooms, but a full flood of humanity. Merchants hawk everything from peacock feathers to fake dragon eggs. Students recite essays to each other loudly and inaccurately, and someone is playing a 2-stringed erhu with enough enthusiasm to almost disguise their lack of rhythm. You make your way towards Silk Street. It's not the official name, but no one calls it anything else. Dozens of fabric vendors crowd the lane with their bright dyes and louder personalities. Silks and gold, coral, cloud gray, and bitter plum hang from every overhang, like flags of eccentric little kingdoms. You sidestep a man, arguing over brocade tassels, and nearly trip over a pile of discarded embroidery patterns. And then you hear it. Oh no, it's him, a voice you'd recognize anywhere. Loud, slurring, and full of poetic injustice. The moon is a cup of fermented sorrow. You wince, you turn, and yes, there he is, the poet. He is not your poet. No one claims him. He's just present, always, wandering from market to market, clutching a wine gourd and a bamboo scroll, reciting verses that were likely better before he drank half the city dry. You try to slip by unnoticed. You there, tea man, too late. You brace yourself as he stumbles toward you, his hair somewhere between scholar and bird nest. He clutches your sleeve and peers at you as if trying to remember if you're a friend or a hallucination. Do you sell tea for broken hearts? Only in bulk. You reply. He howls with laughter, then wipes an imaginary tear. I need jasmine for clarity and chrysanthemum for sorrow. You sigh. You do have both. You always carry samples, in case of wandering poets or overly dramatic bakers. You give him a small pouch of each and attempt to move on. He stops you again. Wait, one more thing. You brace for a kiss on the forehead or a sudden limerick about sea cucumbers. Instead, he points to the sky and whispers, "Beware the pigeon." You blink. What pigeon? A pigeon immediately poops on your shoulder. He nods solemnly and walks away, muttering about prophetic tea leaves and cloud-shaped betrayal. You wipe your sleeve with as much dignity as one can muster, then finally reach the corner of Silk Street, where the aristocrats occasionally descend, trailing servants and fanning themselves like they've just escaped a volcano. You set up your small display. Nothing fancy. A few sample cups, a ceramic teapot warming gently over a cold brazier, and your best calligraphy sign, soothing, leaves for discerning tongues. A few heads turn. One older woman eyes your samples, clearly curious but pretending not to be. Another sniffs and murmurs something about rustic charm. You nod politely to each. Eventually, someone approaches a young man in a silk robe, so pristine you suspect he hasn't sweated since birth. He leans over your tray and sniffs delicately. "What's this?" he asks, pointing to the Dragonwell blend. "Green tea." You reply, "Picked at dawn." Very gentle. He sips, considers, then frowns. "Too grassy." You offer the osmanthus blend. He sips again. "Too floral." You offer the barley tea. He sniffs it, then looks up, visibly confused. "This isn't tea." "It is," you reply, "just not from leaves." He squints at you like you've insulted his ancestors. You smile politely. "Would you like something more caffeinated?" "I'd like something more noble." You pause, then reach for your last trick, a blend you created during a slow week when you had too much time and too many dried fruits. You pour, he sips. He says nothing. Then, acceptable, and he walks off. You glance down. He left a coin. Historians still debate whether Tang Dynasty merchants viewed noble customers as boons or burdens. You think the answer depends on whether or not they leave money behind. In this case, one coin, enough for dumplings and a new pigeon-proof robe. You begin packing your tray. You've dodged the poet, survived the aristocrats, and only lost one scoop to wind. A successful trip. But as you move to leave, someone else approaches. She's older, in a simple robe, hair streaked with gray, eyes sharp. She picks up your last sample cup and sniffs. This one is good," she murmurs. You nod. "A blend I've been refining." She smiles. "I ran a tea house for 30 years. Retired now, but I always remember the ones who brew with patience." You blink. "Would you like some for home?" She laughs. "No, but I might send someone to buy your oolong. If it's roasted properly." Then she vanishes into the crowd, leaving behind nothing but a compliment and a new kind of pressure. You wrap your tray and start the walk back, dodging silk salesmen, curious children, and the occasional runaway pig. You're halfway down the lane when you hear a familiar voice shout, "The tea merchant has a prophecy." You don't even look back. Back at the shop, the moment your foot crosses the threshold, you're ambushed. Not by a pigeon this time. Thankfully, but by bureaucracy, a man in fine robes with a bald patch like a polished melon stands examining your shelves with the intensity of someone preparing to write a haiku about their disappointment. You recognize the type instantly. Low-level bureaucrat with high-level opinions. You set down your tray gently and bow. He does not bow back. "I'm here," he says gravely, "on behalf of the District Beverage Quality Council." You didn't even know there was such a council. You're pretty sure it's a real organization that got out of hand. He gestures vaguely at your poor bricks. These appear overly compressed. You blink. They're supposed to be. That's how they're shipped. And aged? He purses his lips like you've offered him vinegar. Aged is a relative term. I once sampled a 10-year leaf that tasted like envy and wet socks. You nod slowly. Perhaps it wasn't brewed with the right water. I boiled rainwater from a pine grove in the western mountains. He replies. Insulted. Of course you did. He turns to your tea guanyin. This one, roasted gently, aromatic, slightly nutty, lovely. In the third steeping, he sniffs. Nutty. Tea should not taste like snacks. You say nothing. You smile. You are a rock in the river of opinion. Finally, he gestures to your jasmine pearls. And these, you sell these for how much? You name your price, already bracing. He blinks. That's very reasonable. You were not braced for that. He nods slowly, plucks a small pouch from the shelf, and reaches into his sleeve for a coin, so polished it could double as a vanity mirror. Transaction complete. He pauses. Tea, he declares, should evoke philosophy, not whimsy. You nod solemnly. Some of ours has been known to cause mild existential dread. He actually smiles. Then, with the rustle of official robes, he turns and exits his presence, vanishing like steam from a lidless teacup. You exhale. That could have gone worse. You pour yourself a small cup of chrysanthemum to celebrate fragrant, a touch bitter, excellent for recovering from state-sponsored visits. You sip, lean on the counter, and take a moment to breathe. That's when the cat appears. Your cat is not yours. Technically, it lives somewhere between your neighbor's woodpile and the incense shop down the alley, but it always shows up around lunch or moments of bureaucratic stress. It pads silently into the shop, leaps onto the counter, and stares. You stare back. You miss the drama. You say. It blinks once, slowly, then curls into a ball, right on top of your shipment ledger. Typical. As you're brushing fur from your inventory sheet, a familiar voice calls from the doorway. It's old Auntie Gao, the noodle vendor, with opinions on everything and the lung capacity of a bronze gong. She hobbles in, waving a basket. I brought you duck eggs and scandal. You beckon her in. As she sits loudly, you pour her a cup of the roasted barley blend she likes. She takes it without thanks, because that would ruin the routine. So, she says, guess who bought a third concubine? You raise an eyebrow. The rice merchant? No, she whispers. His wife. For herself? You laugh. She grins like a victorious general. Gao continues for a full 10 minutes, weaving a tale that involves moonlit meetings, secret embroidery messages, and one very confused delivery boy. By the time she leaves basket lighter, cup empty, you're genuinely refreshed. There's something soothing about gossip when served with tea. Not malicious, not cruel, just human, warm, a little silly. Historians still argue whether the social power of Tang tea shops came from their drinks or their gossip. The truth. It's both. Leaves and whispers, cups and confessions. Later that afternoon, you get a visit from a student named Lin. He's wide-eyed, jittery, and clutching his exam papers like they're a sacred relic. I need something, he says, for clarity and memorization and possibly courage. You offer him a strong green tea with mint and ginseng. He sips, nods, and visibly relaxes. Then, also, maybe something for foot cramps. You hand him a sachet of dried orange peel and instructions to soak his feet. He leaves beaming, certain that he will now pass the civil service exam and become prime minister within the week. After him, it's a steady parade. The candle maker with wax-stiff fingers. The grandmother, searching for something to help her daughter sleep. The butcher's apprentice who buys jasmine, claiming it helps him think about art. You smile through it all. You brew. You listen, and as the light begins to slant through the shop's paper windows once again, you realize something odd. You're happy, not rich, not powerful, but full, content. The kind of feeling a good steeping gives after the second cup, and just then, as if the universe is gently mocking your peace. A crash echoes from the back room. You rush in to find a tea scoop rolling in slow circles, and the cat, utterly unrepentant, sitting next to an overturned sack of licorice root. It stares at you. You stare back. Fine. You say, you win. It blinks, slowly, and falls asleep right there, in your ruined herbs. Evening comes quietly, like a cat that knows it's already inside. The shadows stretch long and lazy across your floorboards, softening the edges of the jars and jars of leaves, making the bronze scale gleam like it remembers a better time. The shop smells like citrus and barley, with a faint ghost of roasted oolong from a sample you forgot to finish. Outside, the alley has calmed. The clang of smiths and the yells of delivery boys have faded into the soft chatter of neighbors sharing supper stories, and the far-off chime of a temple bell welcoming twilight. You hear the clop of hooves pulling carts full of sleepy vegetables and a child giggling at something probably sticky. Inside, you light the lanterns one by one, not because you expect more customers, but because light belongs in a place like this. Gentle light, amber glow light, the kind that makes a cup of tea feel warmer and your ledger seem less judgmental. You sit behind the counter, feet bare now, fanning your toes with a folded fan and sipping the third steeping of your osmanthus green. It's weaker now, more memory than flavor, but lovely all the same, like a story told for the third time. The cat stirs in the back and makes a sound like a broken flute. You ignore it. Then comes the softest knock, not urgent, not commercial, the kind of knock that says, I don't want to buy anything. I just want to be near tea. You open the door to find a girl 10, maybe 11 eyes wide, fingers clutched around a wooden token. She stares up at you with the intensity only children and bureaucrats can summon. Are you the merchant with the sleepy tea? She asks. You nod. Depends how sleepy you want to be. My grandmother says your tea made her forget 3 whole regrets. That's our limited edition blend. She grins. I have 1 copper coin. What will that get me? You consider a sample and a story. She's delighted. You let her in and pour a 1/4 cup of your lightest chamomile blend, scented with a touch of honeyed fennel. She sips it like it's a sacred brew. Then she waits for the story. So you tell her one about the monk who fell asleep during meditation and dreamed the entire Tang legal code backwards, about the prince who could only remember names if he brewed tea while reciting them, about the retired swordmaster who ran a tea shop that only served tea to cats. She giggles, sipping slowly. And when the cup is empty and the tale ends, she sighs. I'm going to come here every night until I grow old. You nod. We have a discount for lifelong customers. She leaves with a sachet wrapped in paper and a grin wide enough to hold the whole street. You feel lighter, not because she paid, not even because she listened, but because she believed. You sweep the floor at absent-mindedly. The broom swishes softly, pushing stray leaves and the day's dust toward the door. A single chrysanthemum petal catches on your sandal and rides along for several minutes like a lazy boat on a quiet river. Then, as you lower the lanterns and begin your evening shutdown, something odd happens. A scroll slips from behind the counter, not unusual in itself. You keep too many loose papers and old orders, but this scroll is different. You unroll it slowly. Your handwriting, it's an old blend, a recipe, night whispers, something you made years ago and forgot. Written on the back of an old tax form, licorice root, jasmine buds, a touch of lavender, 2 tea leaves from a plant near the foot of the western mountains, crushed almond shell, a pinch of starlight. Okay, that last part is either a joke or a mistake. Hard to say. You remember this blend. You made it for a woman who cried into every cup and said she hadn't slept since her husband ran off with a flute player. You never knew if it helped her. She stopped coming after 2 weeks, and you never asked why. But seeing the recipe now, something stirs. You gather the ingredients, at least. What you still have, lavender. Yes, jasmine, always. Licorice root, fresh from today's disaster. The almond shell. You'll skip someone, once had a sneezing fit, and blamed you for a week. But the spirit of the thing remains. You brew it, and as the scent rises sweet, soft, oddly nostalgic, you sip. It's warm, not just in temperature. It tastes like memories that didn't happen to you, like old stories told beside a low fire, like the sound of pages turning just before sleep. Historians still argue whether the greatest Tang tea masters were brewers, poets, or philosophers with kettles. But you know the truth. Sometimes they were just tired people with good instincts. And tonight, you feel like one of them. You sit by the window, cradling the cup, watching the lanterns flicker in the distance. The city exhaling its final breath of the day. And in that moment, you understand tea doesn't just end a day. Sometimes it forgives it. Morning arrives, not like a sunrise, but like a subtle nudge from the universe that you are, regrettably, still alive and still responsible for inventory. You blink awake on the woven mat behind your counter. The night whispers blend, still clinging faintly to the air, and realize 3 things in rapid succession. 1, your cat has claimed your chest as a sleeping platform. 2, you forgot to extinguish the incense stick, which has burned itself out in dramatic ash curtain fashion over your ledger. 3, someone is knocking. Insistently, you peel the cat off your robe, gently curse the incense stick's ambition, and stumble to the door. It's your neighbor, Wen the ink maker, short, round, perpetually blotched with soot, and currently holding a teapot like it might explode. She did it again, he says, shoving the pot towards you. You raise an eyebrow. Who? My aunt. Wen's aunt is a legend. Not the good kind. The kind of legend people write cautionary proverbs about. She insists on boiling her own tea in soy sauce for additional depth. She once tried to flavor dragonwell with crushed garlic. You're still emotionally recovering. She says your chrysanthemum blend gave her prophetic dreams. Wen adds, so now she steeped it in oxbone broth and says, the emperor is coming to dinner. You try very hard not to sigh audibly. You take the teapot, sniff it, and yes, chrysanthemum, licorice, beef fat, a crime against tea and cows. I'll make her something. You promise. He nods gratefully. Make it taste like authority. Maybe she'll finally stop putting cumin in her oolong. He waddles off, muttering. You duck inside, rinse the pot twice, and brew a gentle citrus blend for her. Then label it Imperial Resolve. She'll love it. Then you turn to your actual duties, restocking the front shelf, counting out samples, and prepping for the afternoon rush, which usually includes three types of customers: those who know exactly what they want, those who want whatever the emperor's sister might hypothetically drink, and those who think tea should solve heartbreak, insomnia, and skin conditions. You're halfway through repackaging your latest lot of roasted tea guanyin when a soft voice calls from the doorway. "Excuse me, are you the one who makes the memory blend?" You look up. She's older, wrapped in blue linen, hair streaked with silver, and eyes like polished jade. Her voice is clear, but carries the weight of someone who's been searching for something longer than she expected to. "I might be." You say, "What kind of memory?" "The kind you don't want to lose," she says, "but also don't want to keep." That answer gives you pause. Then again, tea is emotional alchemy. You've brewed blends to help monks stay awake through 3-hour meditations, and one to help a potter forget the name of her ex-boyfriend's donkey. You think for a moment, then you nod and disappear into the back room. You return with a jar lavender, smoked plum, a pinch of aged white leaf, and something else, something that tastes a little like unsent letters. You scoop a portion into a silk pouch and tie it with a ribbon. She doesn't ask the name. You don't give one. She presses 2 coins into your hand, and for a moment, your fingers touch. Hers are cold. Yours, still warm from the kettle. She bows once, deeply, and leaves. The shop feels quieter after that. Even the cat moves softly, curling behind the ceramic jars, like it's mourning something it never knew. Historians often speculate on the role of tea in Tang spirituality, whether it was ritual, routine, or something else entirely. You think it was all of it. Tea isn't just a drink. It's a practice, a pause, a kind of shared silence between you and the universe. You sit with that silence for a moment, sipping a new cup of Dragon Well that tastes slightly better than it did yesterday, and wonder if maybe it's because of the water or the mood. Then the silence breaks with a loud, cheery knock. It's Madame Fang again, this time dragging her cousin by the sleeve like a toddler with a particularly fussy gourd. He doesn't believe in tea, she announces. You blink? That's like not believing in soup. He says it's leaf water, she hisses, as if repeating a slanderous curse. Her cousin, a wiry man, with the frown of someone who hasn't laughed since the Sui Dynasty, crosses his arms. I just don't see the point. You say nothing. You hand him a cup. Not your best blend, not your rarest, just a simple roasted barley tea, warm, nutty, soft as a sigh. He sips, and to his credit, he doesn't pretend to love it. He doesn't swoon. He just nods. This is nice, he says. Madame Fong looks triumphant. He's converted. You correct her gently. He's warm. That's the start. They leave in high spirits, arguing over whether tea is better than wine. You already know the answer. Of course, as the light begins to angle again, soft, long, golden, you glance at the shelf where the memory blend had sat. Empty now. You'll make more. Eventually, but for now, you brew another pot. Because today, you remembered something too. Not a moment, but a feeling that some things, even grief, are better steeped than buried. The sun slips below the tiled rooftops like a coin disappearing into silk, and with it comes a breeze, the kind that whispers through alleyways and makes the lanterns sway, just enough to remind you they're made of paper. You lean on the threshold of your shop, cup in hand, watching the sky change shades. First honey, then peach, then the faded ink of a scholar's second brushstroke. From the west comes the smell of grilled duck skin. From the east, incense. And from directly across the street, a loud sneeze followed by a philosophical sigh. The tofu vendor is back from his nap. You take a final sip of your jasmine lavender blend and close up the shutters halfway. Not quite closed, but almost Tang merchant code for I will sell to you if you are charming or mildly interesting. Then the bell tinkles, and in walks your most eccentric customer. Her name is Li Mei. She wears 13 bangles on one arm, none on the other. She walks like someone who once danced for a living and still hasn't fully stopped. She buys tea by asking questions, odd ones. Which of these brews would a rabbit prefer? She asks today, swirling her sleeve like it's part of the performance. You consider this seriously? Well, the rosebud pour smells like soft grass and regret. Perfect, she says, already pulling coins from her sleeve. As she pays, she leans closer. You know the poet who sleeps near the temple pond? You nod. Who doesn't? He says you once sold him a blend that made him dream in color. You shrug. He drank that on top of fermented rice soup. That probably helped. She grins. Still, you're becoming a legend. You snort. I prefer a mystery. But the truth is, you don't hate it. Li Mei leaves with her pouch of rabbit-preferred tea and a wink, and you return to your back shelf to take inventory. Your fingers trail along the jars like a musician choosing the next note. Hibiscus half gone, licorice root restocked. Thanks, cat. Osmanthus, crumbling but fragrant. Then you notice something odd. The tin-marked Imperial Ash Blend is missing. You blink. That was your experimental batch. Tea guanyin, roasted over sweet wood and blended with dried bamboo leaf and, yes, a pinch of ash from the incense burner. It wasn't even labeled for sale. You rifle through your ledgers, your counter drawers, even the pigeon-proof cupboard. Gone. The cat offers no help, unless you count its blink as confession. You mutter to yourself and return to the front, only to find a scrap of paper on the counter. In calligraphy you don't recognize. It reads, left 2 coins, took a chance. Or you exhale. Fioi. W is the mysterious customer who comes once a season, always when you're not looking, leaves exact change, sometimes overpays, never speaks. One time, they left a haiku. One time, a drawing of a teacup with wings. You shake your head, smiling despite yourself. If anyone could make use of the Imperial Ash Blend, it's W. Historians still debate whether Tang Dynasty merchants understood customer branding the way modern businesses do. But you've always believed in creating stories, not just sales. W may be a mystery, but they're your mystery. You pour yourself a comfort brew, barley and hawthorn, and step outside for a moment, sitting on the stoop with your cup balanced on your knee. The evening is full now. Stars wink overhead, and a drumbeat in the distance marks the watch change. A few lanterns float in the canal, bobbing softly, like lost dreams with tiny flames. Your neighbor, the lantern maker, walks by with a crate of glassless frames. They're for tomorrow, he says. You blink. What's tomorrow? The Festival of Paper Echoes. He replies, clearly scandalized that you forgot. Don't you ever leave your shop? You shrug. Only for snacks. He snorts and moves on, muttering something about tea people and their priorities. You finish your cup slowly, watching a moth dance in the lantern glow. Festival of Paper Echoes. You'd almost forgotten. A small, charming holiday celebrating the act of writing things you wish you'd said and letting them go. People write regrets, wishes, forgotten apologies on slips of paper and either burn them, fold them into boats, or leave them on temple steps. The idea is to speak without speaking. Tea and silence. You've always liked that. You return inside and begin preparing. No, not for crowds. You'll get maybe 5 customers, but for something better. Conversation. You gather parchment scraps, your good inkstone, and a brush. You set them beside the tea station and write a small sign. Festival blend comes with one unsent sentence. You don't know what people will write, but you know what. You'll brew a mellow blend, comforting and a little sad. Chrysanthemum, toasted rice, a touch of ginkgo leaf, and just enough mint to remind you it's okay to keep breathing. And before the night ends, you prepare your own slip of paper. You stare at the blank space for a long time. Then you write, I forgive you for all of it. You fold it once, twice, and tuck it inside your ledger. Not every regret needs a river. Some need a shelf. Morning on the festival of paper echoes is quiet in a way that feels deliberate, like the city is holding its breath. Even the birds seem to chirp with extra spacing between notes, as though they, too, are making room for reflection. You wake early, not because you must, but because something in the air has stirred you. Your first cup is a strong one. Black tea with a twist of orange peel and dried ginger. Just enough kick to remind you that you exist and have a spine. You sip it slowly on the front stoop, watching the city wake up. Across the way, the tofu vendor is hanging scraps of calligraphy from a bamboo pole. One reads, I wish I had taken the other road. Another simply says, sorry. Even the cats seem more poetic today. You open the shop and pin your sign for the festival at eye level. Then lay out the writing materials on the front table next to the tea canisters. It doesn't take long for the first customer to appear. It's the scholar. He still hasn't said a word to you in nearly 2 years of visits. But today, he walks straight in, nods once, and picks up the brush. You pour him a cup of tiguanyin while he writes. His hand trembles slightly. When he finishes, he folds the paper once and places it inside his own sleeve. Not for the temple, not for the fire, just for himself. He lifts his tea, sips, and sets down 3 coins, more than necessary. You nod. He nods. Nothing more needs to be said. After him, the trickle becomes a stream. A middle-aged woman scribbles furiously, muttering under her breath about someone named Chen, who never returned a cooking pot. A pair of school children ask if they can write their messages in rhyme. The local magistrate's son buys a blend and writes 3 separate notes, each one more dramatically folded than the last. Historians still argue whether Tang-era festivals were more about community bonding or spiritual cleansing. You muse aloud, handing over a pouch of mint green tea to a passing dancer. Personally, I think they're about creating sanctioned excuses for emotional chaos. The dancer laughs, or for drinking tea that makes you cry. She's not wrong. Around mid-morning, old Auntie Gao arrives with her usual vigor. But instead of gossip, she's holding a slip of paper and a cup. I want your sleepiest blend, she announces, and no judgment. You give her chamomile, fennel, and red date. She downs it like a warrior at the end of a campaign and pushes her note toward the candle you've set aside for burning. You watch it catch, curl, and vanish. Feel better? You ask. I feel 40 years younger, she says, grinning. Unfortunately, I still look 90. You pour her a refill anyway. By midday, your tea stock has taken a hit. People are more willing to splurge when they're pairing it with metaphysical release. You reach for the backup blends, odd experiments you'd tucked away for days just like this. The Plum Moon blend, too fruity for scholars, but perfect for heartache. The 3-size mix, bitter with a slow floral bloom. Ideal for midlife revelations. You even dust off the midnight root tea earthy. Dark, just barely sweet. You've only sold it twice. Once to a widow, once to a traveling actor with far too many rings. Then comes someone you don't expect. The poet, hair slightly neater today. Slightly. He walks in with a slow dignity That implies he's rehearsed this. I need a blend for forgetting someone I never met, he says, voice soft. You pause. Tell me one thing about them. You say, he nods. They wrote poems better than mine. You hand him a blend with bitter melon, mint, and dried rose. He sips, nods, then sits down and writes for nearly half an hour. You brew for others, burn notes, refill ink. The day hums, the light shifts, and still, people come. A noblewoman who speaks only through her attendant, a blacksmith with a hand too scarred for writing, who whispers his message and asks you to pen it for him. A girl who writes nothing but stares at the candle for 10 long minutes before bowing and leaving. You begin to wonder whether your tiny shop has become a temple by accident. And in a way, it has not a temple of gods, but of pause, of process, of the soft murmur of boiling water and paper and breath. As dusk nears, you finally take a moment to write your own message for the second time that day. This one says, I'm sorry I didn't say it then. You fold it slowly. This one you don't burn. This one you place behind the loose tile near your brewing station, beside the other few you've hidden there over the years. A growing archive of unspoken words. The evening winds down. The lanterns outside flicker. The cat bats lazily at a curled slip of paper and then curls around it like it's a sibling. You pour your last cup of the night. Barley, hibiscus, a pinch of cinnamon, warmth in liquid form. You drink it slowly, standing in the doorway, watching the flickers of other candles in windows and drifting notes of burned messages carried off in the breeze. Some things are meant to be said. Some things are meant to be steeped. And some, like tea, and people just need time. It's the morning after the festival of paper echoes, and the air smells faintly of ashes, wet ink, and too many secrets folded into too little paper. You step outside with your first cup oolong today, aged just right, and watch the wind nudge little burnt flecks of charred regrets down the alley like lazy fireflies. The street is quieter than usual. Festival days always leave a kind of emotional hangover on the city. People walk a little slower, speak a little softer, as though they've all just confessed something and aren't quite sure who heard. You smile at the thought, sip, and step back inside to tend to what the festival always leaves behind. A mess of crumbs, teacup stains, and half-scribbled notes abandoned by people who couldn't quite commit. You find one under the bench by the door. It reads, in shaky brushstrokes, I shouldn't have sold the mule. You nod. That tracks. The cat, as usual, has found the single sunbeam in the room and sprawled across it like a furry bureaucrat mid-nap. You step over its outstretched paw, make a mental note to sweep again, and begin restocking this morning's goal. Prep your traveling kit, because today is market day, not the local stalls. Those are routine. Today, you're heading across town to the Grand Market near the West Gate, an overwhelming sprawl of colors, shouting, spices, stolen poems, knockoff statues of immortals, and people who pretend not to haggle until they suddenly do. You pack methodically, small sample jars, 2 folding fans, one for fanning, one for emphasis, your second best robe, and the display cloth with the mysterious mountain merchant logo you drew during a slow sales week. You add a pouch of your sleep blend, 1 emergency snack-dried apricot with sesame, and the single wooden token that proves you paid for your stall. You bribe the donkey with a sweet potato and load up your cart, offering a silent prayer to the gods of uneven cobblestones. The donkey, possibly moved by the gesture, or just the potato cooperates. The streets on the way to the Grand Market are alive with post-festival energy. You pass a group of children chasing each other with leftover candle stubs, an elderly couple arguing over whether regrets should be burned clockwise, or counterclockwise, and a troupe of performers practicing ribbon dances that almost, but not quite, cause a noodle cart collision. You arrive at the Grand Market mid-morning and find your spot between a man selling genuine phoenix feathers and a woman aggressively marketing her emotionally stable chickens. You lay out your cloth, arrange the jars, and put on your best, vaguely serene face. The first customer is a merchant with a booming voice and suspiciously waxed eyebrows. He wants something to help him stay alert on long journeys. You offer him a black tea spiked with ginseng and orange zest. He drinks it, blinks twice, and shouts, "I'm awake." Then he buys 3 packets and leaves while narrating his own exit. Next, a teenage girl who giggles every time you say the word steep. She asks for something romantic. You give her a rose hibiscus blend and a short rhyme about longing. She buys 5 sachets and skips away, humming a love song you suspect is about a musician with more hair than talent. You're just pouring a sample for a pair of visiting monks when you hear it. A soft clink, not of coins, of ceramic. You look up. A man with sunburned cheeks and travel-worn clothes is holding one of your cups, tilting it back and forth thoughtfully. "Did you roast this over pine wood?" he asks. You nod. He smiles, slowly. "You trained in Janan." You blink, briefly. "Thought so." He says, setting the cup down. "My teacher was your teacher's rival." You raise an eyebrow. He grins. Still is, probably. You both laugh. He buys a pouch of your green tea and bamboo blend and leaves without another word, vanishing into the market crowd like a subplot you'll never finish. As the sun climbs, so do the crowds. A man tries to pay you in dried figs. A noblewoman's assistant demands a refund because her mistress didn't achieve satisfactory levels of nostalgia. Someone else asks if you've heard of chicken-infused puree, which you try not to take personally. By late afternoon, you're down to your last 2 pouches, and your voice has taken on a raspy, storyteller's lilt. Your feet ache, your hands smell like 5 different kinds of bark, and your cart is noticeably lighter. Just as you're about to pack up, a boy barefoot, breathless, runs up to your table. "You have sleep tea?" he asks. You nod, lifting your final pouch. He thrusts forward a crumpled piece of cloth with 3 coins tied inside and whispers, "For my sister? She's tired all the time, and nothing helps." You soften. You pass him the pouch and tuck in a bonus sample, your Night Whispers blend, the one with the lavender and starlight. "Brew it gently," you say, "and don't let her worry about steeping time." He nods and runs. Historians still argue whether Tang markets were better for trade or gossip, but you know this: they were places of brief human magic, of small moments that stretch longer than they should, of people finding things they didn't know they needed. You pack up the cart slowly, watching the crowds thin. The stall banners sway in the breeze, and the sky shift once again into its evening robe of amber. And as you guide your donkey home, the cart lighter and your pockets fuller, you feel something you can't quite name, something like clarity, like a story nearing its middle. You arrive home just as the last slant of golden light kisses the top of your doorway, catching on the curled edge of your sign like a goodbye. The donkey snorts, clearly under the impression that its shift should have ended an hour ago, and resumes its usual position of pretending to be deeply exhausted by everything except sweet potatoes. You unload your cart in familiar rhythm. Empty jar, half jar, coin pouch, tea scoop, someone's forgotten fan, a dried fig that you definitely didn't accept as payment, but somehow ended up with anyway. You make a small pile of mystery items on the counter for future reflection or immediate regifting. Inside the shop, The air is cooler, still, like the walls are waiting for you to breathe first. You do. Then you light a small stick of cedar incense and place the Night Whisper's blend on the shelf with the others, now joined by your dwindling stock of barley, green, and floral blends. The cat, who did not accompany you to market, for reasons only it understands, is curled atop your account ledger, using it as both pillow and protest. You could have helped. You say, "It doesn't even blink." You begin counting coins into your small ceramic bowl, taking quiet inventory, not just of earnings, but of the kinds of customers you served. There's a rhythm to it. 2 coins for the widow, 3 for the scholar, 5 from the merchant with waxed eyebrows. A tiny ecosystem of human exchange, measured in leaves and loose change. You brew yourself something soft barley and dried date because your voice is hoarse and your back is making suspicious noises. The kettle hisses. The steam fogs your window. You feel your shoulders drop, tension melting out like oversteeped tea. Then you spot it, a letter folded neatly and slipped beneath the door frame. No seal, no name. You pick it up and unfold it slowly. Just 5 brush strokes inside. The blend worked. She slept. You stare at the note for a long time. No signature, no payment. But the handwriting matches the boy from the market. You fold the note and tuck it into your ledger, just above today's sales tally. Some transactions aren't measured in coin. Historians still argue whether Tang merchants saw themselves as artisans or tradespeople. But today, you feel more like a potter shaping something with intention than letting it go, knowing it may return as a story, a sigh, or a thank you note in the dark. Night deepens outside, drawing indigo curtains across the sky. You leave the shop door half open, not for customers, but for air, and possibly stray thoughts. The street is hushed now, but not silent. A faint flute echoes down from a second-story balcony. Someone 2 houses over is laughing in that way that suggests rice wine and questionable choices. You sit with your tea and begin the part of the evening you secretly look forward to. Blend tinkering. This is where you create the teas that don't make sense on paper. The blends no customer has asked for yet, but that feel right when the moon is a certain shape, or your memories smell like dried plum tonight. You try dried chrysanthemum, winter melon rind, and a sliver of aged puer. You sip. Close, but needs something grounding. A pinch of mugwort, too bitter. A dried fig slice. Now it tastes like guilt on a stick. Eventually, you land on a small miracle. Fennel, chrysanthemum, a whisper of ginger, and 1 single shred of orange zest. You sip. You close your eyes. It's warm, familiar, the feeling of walking home after being slightly too brave. You label it courage after midnight. You make only 2 sachets, because you know the right person will ask for it. They always do. As the lantern light flickers, and your cat stretches in luxurious betrayal of the hard day you had, you close the ledger, tie up the coin pouch, and refill the water jar one last time. You glance over at the wall. Tile the one hiding your oldest, unsent notes. You don't add to it tonight. You just touch it, lightly, and feel the weight of all the quiet that lives behind that stone. Then you blow out the lantern, settle into your mat behind the counter, and whisper goodnight to the jars, the leaves, and the lives they've helped nudge along. And somewhere, in a room far from yours, a girl sleeps soundly, because a stranger thought to brew leaves with a little care. You sleep longer than you meant to, not in the lazy, indulgent way, but in the way where the sun's already climbed halfway up the sky, and your tea water is colder than your ambition. When you sit up, your back protests with a sound like an old door, and the cat, noting your movement, jumps onto your chest just to make a point. You mutter vague curses at time and cats, then shuffle into the front of the shop. It's a warm morning, the kind of warm that makes people pretend they don't mind sweating. The alley is already bustling. Someone's shouting about cabbage. Someone else is laughing, like they've just heard the secret to immortality. And a rooster is definitely crowing out of spite. You start your day not with tea, but with water. Cold, plain, and necessary. Even your kettle seems to understand, quietly waiting its turn on the stone stove. Today, your agenda is deceptively simple. A delivery run. Yes, even in your rarefied position as a tea merchant of medium reputation and high sarcasm, you still hand deliver certain blends. Some customers prefer it that way. Some are too important or too peculiar to visit your humble shop. You load a small satchel with carefully wrapped sachets. You bring a notebook, a string of coins, a packet of candied ginger for bribes or personal use, and a slip of paper with your route scrawled in shorthand only you understand. First stop. Madame Lu, a retired matchmaker with a nose for both gossip and osmanthus. She lives in a courtyard surrounded by 5 identical potted plum trees, none of which she remembers planting. When you arrive, she's already at her gate, brushing her cat with an alarming degree of focus. Finally, she says, I was starting to think you died. Only briefly. You reply, but I steeped myself in ginseng. She chuckles and reaches for her packet of tea, then pauses. Did you change the blend? You blink. Added a pinch of fennel. She squints, makes it spicier, makes it truer. She considers, then nods. Well, I'm lying to fewer people these days. Maybe that's why I taste things more clearly. You hand over the sachet, and she tucks it into her robe like a secret. Next time, bring plum. Next time, remember which tree's yours. You part on those cheerful terms and wind through the back alleys toward your next delivery. Second stop, the music house, a cramped, echoing hall where students of the zither practice melodies that often sound like regret and occasionally sound like brilliance. The teacher, a wiry woman named Shu, prefers a green tea with bamboo and crushed chrysanthemum. You made it for her once by accident. Now, she won't drink anything else. She meets you at the door with a raised eyebrow. Late, alive. You counter? Barely, she mutters, and takes the packet with the reverence usually reserved for relics. She gives you a coin, a tune played softly on her thumb harp, and a compliment you don't understand but accept anyway. Historians still argue whether musicians in the Tang Dynasty had more influence in court or in the streets. You've always thought it depended on who was brewing their tea. Shu, for instance, could overthrow a dynasty with the right melody, or just a bad hangover. You head next to a small house near the watermill. There lives your trickiest client, Uncle Poe. He's not your uncle. He's not anyone's uncle. But he calls everyone nephew or niece and insists on paying for tea with advice and minor prophecies. Today, he's wearing one shoe, carrying a kite, and singing something that sounds suspiciously like an improvised ballad about pickled cabbage. You greet him with the usual, "No, I don't need help starting a religious movement." He grins, toothless. "That's what you said last time. And now, look, your blends are famous in 5 districts." You hand him his tea, a smoky oolong with bits of clove, and something you still haven't identified but seems to make him dance. He slips you a coin, then whispers, "Avoid cabbage today, and possibly Mondays." You nod solemnly and head off. Fourth stop, the bookhouse, run by 2 brothers who argue about everything except tea. One prefers floral blends, the other bitter roots. So you give them both what they want, along with a bonus sample of your mild reconciliation mix barley, red date, and a sliver of peace offering. They grunt Thank you. Immediately, resume arguing over a footnote in a government tax document. Finally, just before dusk, you reach your last delivery. It's not a customer, it's a shrine, small, weather-worn, tucked into the bend of an alley between a pottery stall and a noodle cart. No one claims it, no one tends it, but it's always clean, and there's always a cup. You brew something quiet chrysanthemum, hawthorn, and a dash of wind-dried mint, and pour it carefully into the clay bowl. You don't know who it's for, but you always leave it, a small offering, a small silence, and as you step back and watch the steam rise, curling into the evening air like something leaving gently, you feel settled, not happy, not sad, just right. You return to your shop by lantern light. The cat greets you with a glance that suggests you've been derelict in your duties, and the kettle waits. Patient as always, you set down your satchel, ease off your shoes, and pour one last cup. This one is for you. Barley, plum, a hint of fennel. It tastes like return, like roads that end in familiar shadows, like tea that doesn't need explaining. It's the kind of night that hums, not loudly, not insistently, just a soft, under your skin vibration. The kind of night where the street lamps flicker like they're blinking back sleep, and every sound footsteps wind through the paper shutters. Even your kettle's faint sigh feels padded, distant, like someone turned the world's volume knob just slightly to the left. You don't have any official customers this late, but you're still awake. Because some tea is better brewed in the quiet, and also because your cat has claimed your bedroll again, curled up like a judgmental pastry. You're sipping a test blend, roasted millet, and dried jujube. With just a sliver of citrus peel, it's promising, nutty, mellow, with an aftertaste that feels like remembering an old friend's handwriting. You lean back on your cushion behind the counter, watching the shop settle. The jars rest in their rows like sleepy monks. A breeze slips in under the door, carrying with it the faint smell of night market dumplings and someone's badly tuned bamboo flute. Then comes the rustle, paper, soft, and purposeful. You glance over and spot a folded note tucked under a stone paperweight you didn't put there. You lift it slowly, already smiling. Only one person you know leaves notes with paperweights. Fitzfeinchit, the seasonal mystery customer, has returned silently. Of course, you unfold the note. Your ash blend made me cry. In a good way. You're still weird. Thank you. That tracks. You chuckle, fold the note back up, and add it to the small pile you keep behind the counter. A scrapbook of anonymous praise, veiled insults, and one surprisingly good haiku about barley tea and loneliness. Historians still argue whether Tang-era merchants tracked feedback systematically or just remembered everything. Personally, you like your system, loosely folded and probably tea-stained. A soft shuffle outside pulls your attention. You peek through the doorway and see a woman walking slowly past, lantern in hand, humming an unfamiliar tune. She doesn't look at you, but she pauses just slightly as she passes the shop, then continues on. You wonder what kind of tea she drinks. You wonder if she's mourning someone. You wonder how many people walk past your shop at night, breathing in the faint scent of leaves and wondering if they should have stopped. The thought comforts you more than it should. You head to the back shelf again, fingers trailing the jars. Some are nearly empty. You make a mental list. More osmanthus, more hawthorn, maybe some unusual additions, if you can find them lotus seed, powdered magnolia, dried pear slices. Then you reach the jar at the end, the one you labeled months ago, in a sleepy haze of inspiration and possibly wine. Blend for when you don't know what to feel. You haven't opened it since. You twist the lid slowly. Inside, dried lily petal, aged green tea, a single dried cherry, and something else you can't quite place. Something that smells like paper and memory. You brew a small cup. The scent rises like a story half remembered. The first sip tastes like walking alone on a cloudy afternoon. The second, like a hand you almost held. The third, well, it's personal. You lean against the wooden frame of the doorway and stare out into the stillness. The city sleeps. The sky, deep and velvety, holds the faint glimmer of stars behind a veil of mist. Somewhere nearby, a dog sighs. Somewhere farther, a bell chimes once, maybe from the temple, maybe from someone's dream. Your cat pads over, finally releasing your bedroll, and curls against your ankle. It smells faintly of fennel. You choose not to question it. You close your eyes for a moment and think about how a day can begin with barter and end with poetry. How something as small as a folded note or a well-steeped cup can feel larger than an empire. How, despite what people think, you're not really selling tea. You're selling pause. You're selling permission to breathe a little slower. You're selling stories that steep instead of shout. A breeze flickers the lantern again. You take one last sip and whisper, "Good night," to no one in particular, or maybe to everyone. The wind is up before you are. It whistles gently through the wooden slats of your shop front, carrying with it the dry rustle of fallen ginkgo leaves and the faintest scent of sesame oil from someone's breakfast stand. The kettle hums to itself, warming patiently over coals. You don't remember lighting, which probably means you forgot to extinguish them last night. You sit up slowly, the cushion imprint still stamped into your cheek. The cat stretches like it's auditioning for a scroll painting and yawns with all the elegance of a minor official late to court. Today's task, account keeping. Yes, it's time. Time to reconcile the scroll of who bought what, who paid in coin, who paid in promises, and who gave you a wooden flute in exchange for 2 sachets of sleep tea and a mildly cursed look. You boil water, steep a pot of focus. Please blend ginseng, rosemary, a trace of peppercorn, and fetch your abacus from the back room, where it spent the last month being entirely ignored. You settle in. There is a stack of crumpled receipts, some written on paper, one on what appears to be dried fish skin. You begin with the easiest column. Money in. Your abacus clicks softly. Coins clink. And the numbers, to your sleepy surprise, are mostly in your favor. Then you move on to money out. Tea leaf stock, charcoal, wrapping paper, ink, bribes. You call them negotiation tokens. Emergency rice balls, more tea leaves, mystery herbs. You definitely didn't mean to order, but now feel emotionally attached to. Your lips press into a thin line. It's not ruinous, but it's not great either. You sigh, sip your focus blend, and remind yourself that no one becomes a tea merchant to get rich. They do it to stay awake, or to keep others asleep, or sometimes because they once oversteeped something and never got over it. Then comes the truly delicate part of the process, customer tabs. You open the maybe later ledger. Page 1, Magistrate Ku. Still owes for that batch of roasted barley he claimed would help him survive the poetry contest. Page 2, the zither teacher Shu, half paid with a tune. As usual, still hauntingly beautiful, still not legal currency. Page 3, your cousin Ping, paid with 3 jars of pickled turnips. Your mistake. You tap the abacus beads with theatrical despair. It's then, as you're mulling over whether to accept a handwritten limerick as partial payment for flour tea, that you hear a sound, a soft scritch, scritch, scritch. Your eyes narrow. You tilt your head. You hear it again. It's coming from the back room. You stand, quietly, carefully, armed with your tea scoop. You push aside the curtain. and step into the dim space where your spare jars and delivery baskets are stored. The sound stops. You crouch. Wait! Then movement. A blur near the sack of aged jasmine pearls. A small, twitchy nose. You groan. Not again. The rat is back. Specifically, the rat you've mentally named Gentleman Tail, because he seems to prefer high-grade leaves and has, on more than one occasion, ignored your traps in favor of burrowing into your oolong stash and nibbling delicately at only the tips. You watch him scurry up the side of a storage basket, pause atop your most expensive tin, and give you a look, not fear, judgment. You sigh. Fine. You win. You fetch a tiny saucer, place a small pile of stale, low-grade black tea on it, and set it near the corner. He sniffs it, rejects it, moves on to the jasmine again. You make a mental note to raise prices. Historians still argue whether Tang merchants practice pest control with traps, cats, or negotiation. You're clearly in the gentle diplomacy camp. You spend the rest of the morning reorganizing. You repack tins, wipe down the counters, and brush away rat droppings with the resigned air of someone who understands that cohabitation comes in many forms. You also discover 3 coins tucked behind a jar of rosebud tea forgotten change from a distracted customer, or your cat's secret hoard. You choose to believe the former. The sun climbs higher, warm and honey-colored, spilling into your shop and onto your ledger. The ink glows. The paper feels soft. You set down your brush and realize something quietly profound, despite the rats, the debts, the poems as payment, and the suspiciously underperforming ginkgo. Blend, you're still here, still steeping, still counting, still part of the city's sleepy pulse. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. You pour yourself a final cup, something earthy, honest. It tastes like effort, and like the reward for effort. You sip, and somewhere behind you, the rat sighs, curls into your tea towel, and sleeps. Afternoon sun paints long, amber streaks across the floorboards, like the light itself has decided to take a nap in your shop. You're refolding sachets, smoothing out crinkled parchment, when the bell jingles, not the normal sleepy tinkle, but a sharp, hurried chime that says, "This visitor comes with purpose," or drama. You turn, it's the calligrapher, and he looks upset. His robe is wrinkled, ink smudged to the point of dishonor, and one sleeve is trailing a long, wet brushstroke, like a tale of artistic regret. He's carrying your tea canister in one hand, your delivery from 3 days ago, and in the other, a broken teapot. You blink. Rough week. He slams both items on your counter and exhales like he's been holding his breath since sunrise. The blend. He begins. Yes, the blend is too powerful. My brush has betrayed me. You tilt your head. So, not flavorful enough, he growls, which for a calligrapher sounds less threatening and more like someone angrily organizing scrolls. I drank 1 cup, he says, and wrote 17 pages of characters with no meaning. You nod sympathetically. We call that the spirit of the brush blend. My teapot cracked in protest. You glance at the broken vessel. A clean break, not anger, just exhaustion. Probably just old clay. You offer gently. He sighs and slumps into your guest cushion, dramatically sprawled like a scholar in a tragic romance scroll. You bring him a replacement pot. Not fancy, sturdy, reliable. This one doesn't judge. He lifts it solemnly. Then we shall begin again. You brew him something gentler this time. White tea with lily, barely steeped. He sips, nods, breathes, while he regains his composure. You glance at the jar he returned, still half full, which is generous. Given how often your customers return empty containers with vague stories about sharing them with ghosts or spilling them into the garden for the ancestors, historians still argue whether Tang artisans were overdramatic or simply prone to poetic outbursts. You argue that they just needed more sleep and slightly less aggressive tea. The calligrapher sits upright. I will compose a new piece tonight, he declares. You nod. Maybe aim for words that exist this time. He narrows his eyes. Sarcasm dulls the spirit. You refill his cup anyway. He finishes it, nods in gratitude, and leaves carefully this time, holding the new pot like a sleeping bird. He pauses at the doorway. The blend, it did open something. He admits, I just wasn't ready. You smile. Few people are. He disappears into the street, and you return to your folding. You barely get through 2 sachets before the door swings open again. This time, it's the baker's apprentice, covered in flour, holding a jar like it's full of precious gems. Do you have that blend you made for headaches? She asks. Master, burned the morning batch. And everyone's shouting, and I think I might scream. You hand her a sachet without a word. Peppermint, licorice root, and dried mulberry. She hugs it, leaves. Doesn't even ask how much. You decide to let it slide. You try to sit. You really do. But the bell jingles again. A traveler, dusty robe, sun-wrinkled skin, expression of someone who's tasted many teas and found most of them disappointing. He doesn't speak at first, just sniffs the air like a cat evaluating a new home. Then, do you have anything grounded? You nod. Pull out your field path blend. Roasted barley, ginger root, dried plantain stem. He sips, smiles, like coming home to a place I've never been. You try not to grin. That's a good one. Might write it on a sign. He pays in coin and something wrapped in silk. You don't open it until he's gone. Inside, a carved bone spoon, polished smooth by years of use. You place it beside your teaware, quietly honored. As dusk curls around the edges of your windows, you finally close the shop, sort of half-shuttered, still open to good stories, still open to unexpected returns. The kettle hums, your feet ache, and your counter is dotted with a collage of used cups, faint stains, and a whisper of cinnamon. You sit with your own brew. Something simple now, something honest. Toasted rice, dried pear, and a pinch of salt. It tastes like surviving the day, like effort without applause, like peace that doesn't need explanation. And as you sip, you realize the broken teapot is still sitting in the corner. You pick it up gently. Maybe tomorrow you'll patch it, or maybe you'll plant something inside basil. Perhaps a small reminder that even cracked things hold life. The night is unusually still. The wind has gone quiet, like it stepped out for a moment to consider its life choices. The city sleeps in soft layers. Lanterns gone out, soup pots cleaned, doors bolted, not against threat, but against interruption. You, however, are pacing, not in a worried way, not even in a particularly productive way, just thinking with your feet. That gentle loop around your shop, barefoot, holding a half-full cup of something strong and slightly bitter, like ambition with a side of memory. The tea is roasted green, with dried citrus rind and a shard of licorice root. You call it clarity that comes late, and it's earned the name tonight because you have an idea. No worse. You have a plan. Expansion. Not a full empire. Not yet. Just a second shop, maybe in a smaller town, somewhere near a mountain path or a shrine. You've been told your barley blend pairs beautifully with philosophical hiking. You sip, and in your head, you imagine the scroll sign, whispers, Förkätterstinnebäs, and steam, sister shop. You picture the shelves, the jars, Maybe a young apprentice with opinions about peppermint. Maybe two. Maybe one of them sings while weighing leaves. You realize, after a moment, that you're smiling. Of course, expansion means planning and resources and explaining to your rat that it cannot be franchised. You sit down at your ledger, still warm from earlier ink, and begin sketching the outline. Tea you could stock, days to travel, friends who might help, former customers who owe you favors, or at least semi-legible IOUs. And then, of course, there's the matter of who'd run this place while you're away. You glance toward the cushion behind the counter, where the cat is now asleep in a perfect spiral of indifference. You whisper, "Do you know how to keep ledgers?" It doesn't stir. You take that as a yes. Historians still argue whether Tang-era merchants dreamed big or stayed small on purpose. You're starting to think most just followed their feet until the path turned into something resembling a destination. Your pen scratches on names, places, possibilities. It's not a business plan so much as a wish disguised as logistics. But still it feels solid, real, like a coin in the palm. A knock interrupts you, soft, tentative. You blink. At this hour, you open the door to find a girl no older than 15 holding a pouch. She says nothing, just bows and hands it to you. Inside is one sachet, wrapped in faded silk. You lift it, breathe in. Your own blend, from long ago, one you haven't made in years. Echoes in snow, dried plum, smoked tea, and a trace of juniper. You look up, puzzled. She shrugs. "My mother said you'd remember." And just like that, you do. A woman who once bought 6 pouches on a rainy afternoon and cried when she drank the first one. Where is she now? You ask. The girl doesn't answer right away. Then, she's tired these days, but she says this helped. You nod and reach for your newest blend. Courage After Midnight. You hand it to her without charge. For her. You say. She bows again and vanishes into the moonlight. You stand for a moment in the open doorway, tea pouch in one hand, the other brushing against the night, like it might answer back. You step inside, brew the old blend, and let the steam rise. It smells like winter 4 years ago, like ink-stained fingers and someone saying, "You should name your shop something prettier." You chuckle softly, and then, without thinking, you begin writing not a ledger, not an inventory, a letter. To yourself? To the future you, the one who opens that second shop, the one who still burns the tea occasionally and still can't sell to tourists without rolling their eyes, the one who hasn't forgotten what this all felt like. You write. If you're reading this, you did it. You actually did it. And I hope you're still making that absurd oolong with rose petals and cracked cinnamon. I hope you remember how many people told you it was a silly dream. I hope you still leave tea out for the ghosts. And I hope you finally fix the door hinge. You fold the letter, seal it, and tuck it behind the shelf marked unmarketable blends. You'll know where to find it. You pour the last of your tea and sip slowly, pacing once more. This time, each step feels less like wandering and more like orbit, like a planet drawing closer to a sun it hadn't noticed was home all along. The moon glows faintly through the window. The shop, messy and fragrant and entirely yours, exhales with you, and you realize maybe this was the empire all along. Dawn again, a softer one this time, less dramatic, more pastel. The sky blushes pale pink against the rooftops, and the breeze smells faintly of baked yam and dew-washed stone. You open your eyes before the rooster, which feels like a personal victory. However brief, there's still steam in the kettle from last night's brew. You smile and pour what's left into a cracked cup, sipping carefully. It's lukewarm, a little stale, but oddly perfect. tastes like someone else's memory. You move through the shop slowly this morning, not sluggish, just deliberate, like each gesture deserves its own breath. You check the jars, refill, reseal, reorganize. You wipe down the scales. You line up your teacups like soldiers with extremely delicate porcelain armor. The city outside is still hushed. Morning birds trill lazily from a tiled rooftop. Somewhere in the alley, a broom swishes against stone. You hear Old Man Wen clear his throat and mutter something about young people these days, though you haven't done anything yet to deserve it. Today, you've decided, is a quiet day. No markets, no deliveries, no dramatic poets slamming teapots in distress. Just tending. You roll up the door to let the sunlight in. It washes over your shop like warm milk. The cat immediately relocates to the sunniest spot and melts into a puddle of fur and judgment. You light incense, not jasmine this time, something woodier, calmer, for no reason other than it felt right. Customers trickle in, each one moving at half speed, as if they all got the memo that today is not for urgency. The widower with the beard, like a frayed rope, comes in for his chrysanthemum blend. You don't speak much. He nods once. That's enough. A mother arrives, child in tow, looking for something to help with dreams. You give her your lantern light mix lemon balm. Toasted rice, a whisper of lavender. She lingers a moment longer than usual, like she's waiting for permission to exhale. You give it with a smile. A student stops by to ask shyly if drinking green tea during an exam actually helps. You lie gently and say yes. He leaves with 2 sachets and a little more hope than he came in with. The hours stretch like warm dough. Sometime mid-afternoon, you find yourself sitting cross-legged behind the counter, organizing your collection of forgotten bookmarks. One is a strip of silk from a retired dancer. Another is pressed paper with tiny koi drawn in gold. One is just a dried leaf. You have no memory of adding it, but it fits. You brew a cup of idle hands, blend white tea, fennel seed, pare skin, and stare out the window. No one's in a rush. Even the sparrows hop lazily. And for once, you don't feel like you should be doing more. You just are. You find yourself humming a tune from nowhere, half-formed and fully content. It fills the corners of your shop like smoke from an unseen stove. Evening sidles in, quieter than usual. You light a lantern, not because you need it, but because it adds a softness to the air. Shadows stretch and curl like polite cats. The breeze shifts. Someone burns orange peel nearby. You sip your 5th cup and don't even bother remembering what it is, because it doesn't matter. Because it's enough to sit, to sip, to breathe with the shop as it breathes with you. Historians still argue whether Tang merchants ever truly rested or just paused between transactions. You decide this counts. You hear the footsteps before you see the visitor. Soft, careful, like someone unsure if they're allowed. It's a young man. Nervous posture, calloused hands, clutching a letter. He looks around, then offers it, silently. You take it, unfold it, read the brushstrokes. Your tea, help me speak again. Not loudly, but enough. Thank you. No signature. You don't need one. You place the letter beside your others. You have a spot now, just for these. A drawer labeled words that mattered. The young man bows and disappears down the alley. Into the twilight haze, you pour one last cup for yourself. The blend, made not from need, but instinct. Sweet flag root, ginger peel, plum blossom. You call it end of day. It tastes like dusk, like books half read and candles half burnt, like conversations that don't need finishing. You finish it slowly, watching the street dim, and begin your nightly ritual. Close the jars, turn the labels out, fold the cloth, thank the kettle. You settle into your cushion. You breathe in deep. You breathe out slower and let it all soften. Let the day slide gently into memory. Let the echoes fade. Let the warmth stay.